I think it was slide 15. I'm not going to give you numbers, I guess. Maybe we talked about that 62% before. But it would be, well, if you look at slide 15, it's not that many PlayStation players who play a lot of Call of Duty a year.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I do not have the slides in front of me.
Right. I'm sure that somebody that's there. And so I'm trying to get how you get to that those people will buy an Xbox because Call of Duty is so important to them.
Yes, Your Honor. Well,
how do you decide that Call of Duty is so important to them? It is to some people.
Yes.
Some.
Oh.
But how does he figure out that get to that percentage number that they would actually do the Xbox? What data is he relying?
Well, I would encourage Your Honor to look at the declaration of Mr. Jim Ryan in his testimony, where he's very clear about the financial impact that Call of Duty has on the PlayStation.
That's not my question. My question is how your expert, Dr. Lee, he did a foreclosure model.
Yes.
Right? And the foreclosure model inputted that 20% number.
Yes.
Which represented the share.
Well, that
another number, not all PlayStation users, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And sorry if I misunderstood your question. I think I get it now. So that 20% number, that 20% comes from two main inputs. The first is the LTV, the 5-year expected lifetime revenue of a new Xbox owner. And as we presented to Your Honor, that LTV is for the average Xbox. I'm being careful with the numbers here. And as we showed Your Honor through, I think, a demonstrative, if you remember, with the different colors, Call of Duty games, compared to the average AAA title, they sell quite a lot. They come out every year, around October or November, and they're at the top of the charts. Even Call of Duty Vanguard, which Activision has time and time again said was a disappointment. That was the #1 selling game the year it came out. That's a disappointment for them, but that's still, for every other company, that's a huge win.
So I'm just saying, people who only play Call of Duty, let's say 20 hours a year, are they included in that 20% figure? Or you just even point me to where in his report I should.
Sorry. I apologize, Your Honor. Jem Ackland on behalf of the government. So his report is quite long, and it's actually helpful if Dr. Lee can explain it himself, but we'll try to do our best to explain the economic evidence to you. So if you look at footnote 806 of the report, which is, it's on page 210 of PX 5000, Dr. Lee explains some of how he has sort of got to this rate of people that start using, that might switch, right? So he looks at the universe of people that play Call of Duty and used a variety of data from, my understanding is both from the Gen 8 share model. Remember, Dr. Lee went back and looked at how gamers actually behaved in response to changes under a full generation.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That footnote 806 assumes the 20% number. I'm trying to figure out how you get to the 20% number.
So I don't think it's, respectfully, I don't think it's correct to say he assumed that it was 20%. The 20% is based on the inferences that were drawn both from the prior generation, the share model, which looked at how people behaved in Gen 8, and then you applied that behavior to Gen 9 to try to predict what people would do in Gen 9. The reason is because we don't have a ton of data of Gen 9 today, right? So the 20% conversion rate, that's actually applied in his second model, which is his foreclosure model.
Right.
And that's intended to predict whether Microsoft would actually have the incentive to withhold. I apologize, I hope we're not saying anything confidential. The idea is that would be intended to predict whether Microsoft would actually withhold the data. So again, he used the modeling of what happened in the past to help predict what would happen in the future. It's not just based on, for example, just guessing what the number is.
I know, I understand. I'm just trying to figure out what was the data that was in that model, right? Because, for example, Dr. Bailey showed evidence that the number of PlayStation Call of Duty users that play a lot is actually a pretty small number versus all PlayStation users, right? So
Right. So
And also in terms of revenue, it's not the biggest revenue driver for PlayStation.
think Call of Duty is not the biggest
Right.
revenue driver on PlayStation. So I think this is what's tricky about this case is that you have to look at the specific data for each game. You can't just say I need either the largest game or like you actually have to calculate, which is what we've tried to present. You have to actually calculate what the effect of withholding that game would be. That's what, and we can't just say this is the largest game or a medium.
No, I know. I guess maybe you could just tell me in sort of plain English, why would that particular 20% number buy the Xbox? Like, what is it about Call of Duty that they would abandon their console of choice and buy the Xbox?
So the way to think about this, right, is that a consumer, and again, I'm not an economist, but I'll do my best here. A consumer, let's say they spend $70 on Call of Duty, right? There is a surplus that's associated with that. Like if someone is spending $70 on Call of Duty, they likely value it at much more. Yeah, of course. They likely value it at much more than $70. And so that value that they ascribe to having the ability to play Call of Duty or another Activision game, to be clear, like Diablo, as we heard testimony about yesterday, is quite big. That lost surplus, the benefit that they would get from having a game that they really like. So once they lose that because they no longer have access to the game on the platform, they then have to make a choice, right? And so one of their choices is they can just forego that benefit that they would have kept, and they just lose that. And so that's actually harm that would result from the transaction. Another possibility that they can do is maybe they already own another console, in which case they might just go buy, if they're, for example, the rare number of people who are multi-homers on both Xbox and PlayStation, they could just go and buy on the other console. So that there's not that as much harm there. And then finally, the other option is, well, there's a few more, but just for simplification, finally, they could go and they could spend $500 on an Xbox if they really, really value Call of Duty. And then they get access to Call of Duty again on the platform that they didn't sort of intend to choose. And just to sort of bring it back, that results in a share shift from, we heard a bunch of numbers. I don't know which ones are confidential and which ones are not. That results in a share shift from PlayStation to Xbox. And then this one's a little bit out of my depth, but my understanding is that you can then use that share shift to impute a price change, an implied price.
I understand that. How do you figure out between, you say, well, those who don't switch, who forego buying the Xbox and playing Call of Duty are harmed? True. But you're using that to get to the foreclosure incentive, right? So what I need to know is, how do you calculate the number of people that were, because it has to be enough people. You have to show enough people would switch to Xbox such that Microsoft would have the economic incentive to foreclose. If everyone would just give up on Call of Duty, then they don't have the economic incentive to foreclose, right? Because it would actually cost them money. So how do you figure out how many people would just give up and how many people would actually then buy the Xbox?
So that's based on, and I'm not an economist again, but that's based on looking at the behavior of players based on, for example, past exclusivity, and looking also at the sales behavior of Call of Duty, trying to figure out that, remember that surplus that I was talking about earlier, trying to figure out exactly how much they value that. Because once you understand how much sort of the average, it's not really the average, but how much that certain set of consumers.
It's not the average, right? It's actually the exceptional consumer.
Exactly right. So the people that are actually going to switch are that's sort of the top end of the people that play Call of Duty. So it's people that value it exceptionally highly, right? But some people that are sort of on the lower end, they're just, they may not do anything, right? They may just stop playing it because they don't sort of value it enough to switch. And that's the math exercise that's going on here. And that's what Dr. Lee, who I'm sure could explain this much more ably than I could, has calculated.
So you're saying that was based then, for example, Dr. Bailey showed us data as to the number of hours of played on Call of Duty, right? You would expect that someone only plays 10 hours a year, less likely to switch than someone who plays 200 hours a year.
Right. I think that the data that as I understand it, the data that Dr. Bailey was presenting are more along the lines of inputs into the actual modeling that Dr. Lee did. Right. So I don't know what the exact number is, but I guess I don't personally dispute whatever the telemetry data shows about how much people play Call of Duty, but you can't just stop there. Then you have to go and figure out, what does that tell me about the actual behavior of people that are playing the game? How many of them, remember, I apologize, it's how many of those people are actually going to switch
Yes.
because they value it exceptionally highly. So for example, the people, I haven't done this calculation myself, but I would imagine that the people that play a lot more are far more likely to switch than those people that don't play very often. So that's that telemetry data, that's an input into the foreclosure calculation, but it's not, you can't just look at that data and kind of.
I'm trying to confirm that it was in fact input into Dr. Lee's foreclosure model.
That's correct. Yes, he used telemetry data. I apologize. Was that just the question?
Well, no, that's. Did you want to say something?
I do, Your Honor. I'm not an economist, but I think I can explain it. This 20% is an input, as you're suggesting. It doesn't come out of the model like the 5.5% share shift does. That 20% he came up with as an estimate. There is no basis. He doesn't calculate it from another model or another.
I thought it came from the share/demand model.
No, he used that model first. Dr. Carlton told him what was wrong, and he explained in his rebuttal report, no, they're separate. They're just kind of a check on the outputs, not on the inputs. And he doesn't have any basis. That he can show.
I want to,
The check on the output, because it was higher, it was 8.9%. So therefore, the 5.5% share shift is conservative.
Right, but not the input of the 20%. That goes to exactly your question, which is how many people convert, not how many people want Call of Duty, but to your point, how many people would actually go buy the Xbox? And he makes that number up. And I think I tried to point out during my examination, but if you look at PX 5001 on page 76, he shows a chart, because that is an input of how, if you change that input, you get a totally different answer.
No, I remember that.
But that's what I'm saying is he doesn't say that he can point to a calculation that he did to get the 20%, which I thought that's what you were asking.
that is what I'm asking. So maybe
Yes.
you can show me how you calculate. No, that's okay. How you calculate that. I know you probably didn't even expect to be up here, and you're doing great.
I appreciate that. Your Honor, I really appreciate that. Thank you. No, I didn't expect to be up here, but I also can try to help you understand what we did here. And the reason I jumped in is because Dr. Lee did not just make up the 20%.
Okay,
No.
so show me in the report where I can read where it came from.